This week, we celebrate the 53rd anniversary of the start of what would become the greatest film trilogy of all time. Yeah, I'm including Part 3. I could go on all day about the impact that these films have had, down to the personal connection that we all have to these films. As you know, the story of the Corleones ends in Part 3, where Michael loses everything. The final scene shows the fate of the once mighty Godfather, in eerie contrast to his father's death. A perfect conclusion to the life of a tragic hero. An alternative title to this trilogy could be The Godfather, the Tragedy of Michael Corleone. But as controversial as Part 3 was, it did provide a fitting conclusion to the story. But there's just one problem. Part 3 leaves us with even more questions than before. What's the fate of the Corleone family? How does Vincent handle his position of the Godfather? What is Connie's involvement? Does Michael's son, Anthony, follow in his father's footsteps? But to even go a step further, I think we can all agree that we needed more of Vito Corleone's journey. Yeah, there's merit to keeping a sense of mystery, but it feels like his story is not complete. This is the last we know of Vito's story before the beginning of the first film. That's a huge gap, especially since the novel does offer some great details about this period. And to be honest, it might be as interesting, if not more interesting, than Michael's story. And as it turns out, it seems Mario Puzo and Francis Coppola agree. You see, in the late 90s, even after the, let's just say, mixed reaction to The Godfather 3, these maestros were ready to revisit this saga. And so began the tumultuous story of The Godfather 4. A story with as many twists and turns as the films themselves. Hey, and by the way, do me a favor. Take a look at the like and subscribe button. Don't be a gavone. Hit them once and comment inner circle. Come on, let's get this to 10,000 likes. Loyalty like that don't go unnoticed. Come on, before I gotta start making some phone calls.
That's a Sicilian message.
For years, rumors swirled about The Godfather Part 4, a film that could have redefined the saga. A dual timeline structure, just like Part 2. A final chapter in what would have taken us from the peak of the Corleone Empire to its inevitable destruction. But before we get into the details, let's step into what it could have been. It begins in silence. A vast estate, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over a grand villa. The Corleone name still carries weight, but it's a ghost of what it once was. The world has changed, and so has the family. At the head of it all stands Vincent Mancini, the new Don, his face hardened by the burden of power. He was never supposed to lead, never groomed for it like Michael or Vito. But this is his time, and if Michael spent his life trying to keep the Corleones out of the drug trade, Vincent, he's diving in head first. The 1980s and 1990s, the era of cocaine empires, cartel wars, and dirty money flooding the streets. Vincent sees what's coming. Gambling, unions, olive oil, these are relics of the past. The future is narcotics. But there's a problem. This isn't Michael's world anymore. The old codes of honor, the quiet handshakes in dimly lit back rooms, they mean nothing here. The game has changed, and Vincent is about to learn that you don't get to make mistakes in this business. He's bold, he's ruthless, but he's also reckless. His rise is meteoric, but his fall is inevitable. As the Corleones expand deeper into drug trafficking, Vincent finds himself surrounded by wolves, cartels, corrupt politicians, old enemies. He's powerful, but his enemies are bigger, smarter, hungrier. One by one, his allies fall, his empire crumbles. The Corleone name, once feared and respected, is on the brink of annihilation. But while Vincent's world is collapsing, the film would have pulled us into the past, to the golden age of the Corleone Empire, the 1920s and 30s. This is Vito's world, but it's not just his story. Young Sonny Corleone, growing up in the shadow of his father's rising status in the criminal underworld, the streets are his playground. The family business is all he's ever known. He's watching, learning, seeing how power works, how respect is earned, how fear is cultivated. Michael, Fredo, Connie, just children, unaware of the empire they were born into. And the players, they're all here. A young Tom Hagen, orphaned, just beginning his path to consigliere. Luca Brasi, still the most feared man in the room. Johnny Fontaine navigating the underbelly of Hollywood, with Vito pulling the strings. Even Hyman Roth, young, ambitious, already planning his own rise. The flashbacks would be the missing puzzle piece, the final layer of the Corleone saga. We'd see Sonny's first kill, his first taste of power. We'd see him step into the role of heir, preparing for the day he'd take over. But we'd also see the cracks forming, his temper, his recklessness, his weaknesses, the very things that would one day lead to his downfall. And as the past unfolds, it would mirror Vincent's story in the present. And then the final act, a shootout, a desperate bloody war waged against men who were once his partners. Reports claimed Vincent's death was set to mirror Pablo Escobar's last stand, cornered on a rooftop, outgunned, outnumbered, bleeding as his enemies close in. The last Don of the Corleone family, gunned down. Two men, two Corleones, decades apart, but walking the same doomed path. One rising, the other falling. One building an empire, the other watching it burn. By the end, the message is clear. The Corleone dynasty was always doomed. The film would close in silence just as it began, the golden days of the family long gone, the empire reduced to nothing, the last of its kings buried under the weight of their own ambition. A story about power, greed, legacy, and the bitter truth that in the end, every empire falls. Now, the story behind this potential Part 4 film is maybe just more complicated as the plot. Francis Ford Coppola never wanted The Godfather to be an ongoing saga. "I never believed The Godfather was a serial," he once admitted. "It was only because it made a lot of money that there was pressure to keep doing it." Yet by the late 1990s, something changed. Not ambition, not a desire to top what had already been done, but loyalty to his longtime collaborator, Mario Puzo. Puzo, the man who created the Corleone family, was in failing health. He wanted to leave something behind for his children. Coppola, despite his hesitations, was willing to help. "We had an idea for a fourth one," he later revealed. He even made a personal plea to Paramount. "Give Mario $1 million to write it, and I'll work with him for free." But the studio wasn't interested. At that time, Paramount had a very low-budget mentality, Coppola said. They didn't do it. And just like that, the project stalled. Still, Puzo got to work. He began drafting a script, one that would mirror the structure of The Godfather Part 2, weaving together two timelines. And the casting? That's where things got interesting. By June 1999, Hollywood buzzed with speculation that Leonardo DiCaprio was eyed for young Sonny Corleone. He was the right age, Andy Garcia later confirmed. The UK press even ran headlines declaring DiCaprio and Garcia set to star in The Godfather Part 4. Robert De Niro was reportedly approached to reprise his role as Vito. Garcia himself would anchor the modern storyline as Vincent, while names like Ray Liotta and Luis Guzman were tossed around for supporting roles in the prequel era. For a moment, it seemed The Godfather Part 4 might actually happen. But just as quickly as the excitement built, reality hit. DiCaprio's rep shut down the frenzy, calling the reports very, very premature, adding that there was no script, no deal. Still, they didn't rule it out completely, acknowledging that if Coppola ever made the call, DiCaprio would definitely be willing to listen. But then, Puzo passed away. In July 1999, the project died with him. Coppola, without his writing partner and the creator of that world, lost interest. What Paramount will do now and whether Francis wants to go ahead with the project is pretty much up in the air, Puzo's lawyers said at the time. But Coppola fell silent on the subject. Without Puzo, there was no fourth film. Coppola could have brought in another writer, but that was never going to happen. To him, The Godfather was Puzo's world first, and continuing without him would have been sacrilege. Could Paramount make The Godfather 4 without Coppola? Technically, yes, they own the rights, and over the years, they've never fully closed the door. In 1999, just before Puzo's death, The Hollywood Reporter confirmed that The Godfather Part 4 was in the works, with Garcia leading the project. But after Puzo's passing, the momentum disappeared. He also had a personal theory about storytelling. I have a theory that the fourth in the series in a tetralogy is always the weakest. By the time you get to the fourth, you're using up all the same stuff a fourth time. And if there's one thing Coppola didn't want to do, it was to repeat himself. By 2012, he had put the final nail in the coffin. I doubt a fourth film could happen. There was also the issue of Part 3's reputation. While it earned 7 Oscar nominations and grossed a respectable $136 million, it paled in comparison to the towering success of its predecessors. More importantly, it came out the same year as Goodfellas, 1990, a film that made Part 3 look slow, overly theatrical, and outdated. Fans were divided, critics were lukewarm, and the studio took the hint. Part 3 was not enough of a blockbuster. There might not be a large audience out there still hungry for more. In other words, Paramount wasn't eager to double down on a sequel that could further dilute the series' legacy. Even when Part 4 was being discussed, Paramount was quite reluctant, even though Coppola offered to work for free if the studio gave Puzo just $1 million to write the script, a tiny sum for a potential blockbuster. Paramount refused. That decision turned out to be a costly mistake. Had they greenlit the script earlier, Puzo might have completed it before his death. By the time the studio warmed up to the idea in mid-1999, it was too late. But maybe not going ahead was a good thing. Not everyone wanted Part 4 to happen. Some insiders felt the story had already been told, and that revisiting it would only cheapen the legacy. Legendary producer Robert Evans was among them. When a Godfather novel sequel was proposed in 2002, Evans shut it down immediately. "Leave it alone. They're just prostituting themselves. I wouldn't want to be the guy who has to write it. Even if you're better, you're around with a classic." Talia Shire, and Coppola's sister, was far less interested. "Leave it alone," she told one interviewer in 2011. But if Part 4 had happened, she imagined Connie pushing the family towards legitimacy, maybe even into politics. Maybe she'd be a senator. Maybe we could get ourselves a president. Andy Garcia was all in. I get it all the time, people saying, "Hey man, Godfather 4. But even he admitted that the real question wasn't Paramount, it was Coppola. The family's reaction. In the absence of an official film, fans and commentators have long speculated about what The Godfather Part 4 could have been. Yes, we have an idea, but that never stopped fans from coming up with everything from quite interesting and well-thought-out storylines down to outright ridiculous ones. But for the most part, most of these speculative scenarios build upon the known outlines from Puzo and Coppola. Alternate theories. What else could Part 4 have been? Not every fan theory followed Puzo's rumored outline. Some proposed entirely different directions. A modern-day story where Anthony Corleone, Michael's son, is forced into the family business, which is quite interesting, since I guess it could mirror how he was an outsider to the family business like Michael, and maybe now with the death of his sister, he would follow in his father's footsteps. What do you think? Another idea was for the film to be set in the late 1970s, focusing on Michael Corleone's final years, his guilt and his struggle for redemption. A spiritual conclusion, exploring whether Michael could ever truly escape his past. Some even imagined a final scene with an aged Michael Corleone in the Vatican, confessing his sins before his death, ending the story with the ultimate reckoning for his past. Others include more flashbacks to young Clemenza, Tessio, and even a young, ambitious Emilio Barzini, as well as more rival families. These ideas, however, never gained as much traction as the dual timeline Vincent-Sonny story, which seemed closest to what Part 4 would have actually been. Though none of these fan projects gained mainstream recognition, they prove one thing: the hunger for a Godfather Part 4 never fully disappeared. The legacy of The Godfather and the phantom of Part 4. The Godfather trilogy stands as an untouchable cornerstone of American cinema. The first two films are routinely ranked among the greatest of all time, while Part 3, for all its criticisms, remains an integral chapter of the saga. Together, they form a closed narrative loop, The rise and moral downfall of Michael Corleone, the weight of the legacy, and the inescapable cycle of power and loss. But what if there had been a Part 4? The question lingers like an unsmoked cigar in Michael's study, debated by fans, critics, and even those who helped shape the series, yet will remain a mystery. Would The Godfather Part 4 have ruined the trilogy's legacy? The risk of tarnishing a masterpiece was always a looming specter. That was the danger of Part 4. No matter how well it was executed, it would forever stand in the shadow of its predecessors. Francis Ford Coppola understood this better than anyone. Having already been persuaded to make Part 3 after years of reluctance, he had no appetite for another sequel. And if the Godfather films were about generational decline, then perhaps Part 3 already showed enough. Did we need to see Vincent's failure spelled out in a Part 4 when Michael's lonely, broken state in Part 3 already said it all? Not everyone sees The Godfather Part 3 as a satisfying conclusion. Some argue that a Part 4 could have redeemed the uneven finale, trying to tie up loose ends. Vincent Corleone's reign. Would he prove himself worthy or destroy the family? The Corleone business. How would the family navigate the 1980s underworld? Michael's final moments. Could the story have provided one last confrontation between the old Don and his troubled successor? A Part 4 could have done for the trilogy what The Godfather Part 2 did for the original film, deepened the themes, expanded the mythology, and give a more definitive closure. Imagine this, a young Vito Corleone in his prime, contrasted against Vincent's inevitable failure in the 1980s. A final meeting between Michael and Vincent, where the old Don imparts one last lesson before death. The fall of the Corleone Empire, mirroring Vito's rise, bringing the saga full circle. For some fans, this would have been a perfect thematic bookend, a rise, a peak, and an unavoidable collapse. To me at least, while the prospect of a Godfather 4 sounds like an offer we can't refuse, I honestly'd rather they work on a new original series than to try to add to the masterpiece. Other than maybe some nostalgia and great entertainment, what would it really add? After all, perfection is achieved, not when there's nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. But let's say they managed to craft a perfect masterpiece of a script. It's simply too late. Leo, who was supposed to play a young Sonny, is now 50 years old. De Niro, the only other human to Marlon Brando can play the role of Vito Corleone, is 81 years old. Maybe they can do something with Al Pacino, where it's him in his final years, but a Godfather film with Michael Corleone as a side character is not impossible, but extremely improbable. So most of the main cast, having passed away, not interested or not fit for the prescribed roles, they would have to assemble a whole new cast of impeccable actors and characters to pull this one through. Coppola's final artistic statement on the trilogy came in 2020 with The Godfather: Coda, The Death of Michael Corleone, a re-edit of Part 3 meant to better reflect his vision. At the time, he was asked whether there would ever be a Part 4. His response? There may well be a Godfather 4, 5, and 6, but it won't be me making them. Paramount itself has never fully closed the door, saying, while there are no imminent plans for another film in the Godfather saga, given the enduring power of its legacy, it remains a possibility if the right story emerges. It's a smart answer. Its careful wording is neither a confirmation nor a denial. But in the 25 years since Puzo's death, they haven't pulled the trigger. Even before Puzo's passing, Coppola was never fully committed to Part 4. He always saw The Godfather as a complete story. If not after Part 2, then certainly after Part 3. He wasn't interested in making sequels just to cash in. But here's the problem. Without Coppola or Puzo, who could possibly continue the saga? Even Mark Weingartner, who extended the series and the novels, admitted that if The Godfather were to return, it might work better as a TV series, one that explores the world without trying to replace the original cast. And that's the ultimate hurdle. You can't replace Marlon Brando's Vito Corleone. You can't recapture Al Pacino's Michael. You can't recreate the magic of the 1970s cinematic era that made The Godfather what it was. All these factors make Part 4 a daunting, if not impossible, prospect. The final word? It's been over 2 decades, and The Godfather 4 remains one of Hollywood's great what-ifs, a project that flickered to life just for a moment before vanishing into myth. Maybe that's how it was always meant to be. Coppola himself echoed this sentiment when later spin-offs like a 2006 video game were released without his involvement. The debate over The Godfather Part 4 is as divided as the Corleone family itself. Would it have been a Shakespearean tragedy, the perfect final chapter, or an unnecessary sequel stretching a story that had already reached its natural end? We'll never know. But as long as fans continue to debate, to imagine, and to speculate, The Godfather Part 4 will never truly be forgotten. The final verdict. Could the movie have been great? Maybe. Could it have tarnished a masterpiece? Also, maybe. And that's the risk with a legacy like The Godfather. Sometimes the most powerful ending is knowing when to walk away. Perhaps it's better left as a legend, a whisper in the halls of cinematic history. Because maybe, just maybe, The Godfather is best left exactly as it is, untouchable, iconic, and forever complete. For those of you that still have the urge to return to the world of The Godfather, I've got good news for you. While we may never see a Godfather 4 on the big screen, you can still immerse yourself in the Corleone saga through the novels that expanded on their legacy. The one that I highly recommend, The Family Corleone by Ed Falco. If you ever wanted to know how Vito Corleone truly became the Godfather, how Barzini maneuvered his way up the ranks, and the intricate power struggles that shaped the criminal underworld before the events of the films, this video is about to leave you speechless.